Here it is, USS Hornet. Beautiful day here in Alameda. I'm extremely excited to tour the USS Hornet CV-12, also known as the Gray Ghost. This carrier launched more than 19,000 aircraft sorties and shot down over 1,400 enemy planes. It helped sink over 1 million tons of enemy shipping in the Pacific War alone. During World War II, she earned 9 battle stars and supported campaigns in the Marianas, Philippines, Iwo Jima, Okinawa, and delivered heavy strikes on the Japanese home islands. In '44, she played a key role in the Battle of the Leyte Gulf, the largest naval battle in modern history. On this Docent-led tour, we visit the flight deck operations, pre-flight control, aerology, the navigation bridge, radars used in combat information systems and air traffic control rooms. We'll look at the flag bridge and visit steering. We'll see some examples of the Sonobuoys used in the Cold War and visit some top secret radio rooms and watch a teletype machine print out a vintage classic World War II message to Admiral Halsey. I had to run up some steps to join the tour, so let's go. Yes.
And what's your compelling reason for coming aboard and filming this and everything?
Definitely a World War II buff.
Mm-hmm.
And I've toured the USS Midway. Sorry, I ran up the steps.
Oh, that's all right.
Private pilot. My boss is a pilot. We're both history buffs.
Uh-huh.
Saw the USS Midway. Was in San Francisco. You got to see the Hornet.
Yep, of course, yeah. Yeah, the Midway is kind of a different museum than we are. Of course, the propulsion system on the Midway is the same as ours. It's an oil-fired steam turbine. The difference is that it's a year younger than this ship, the USS Hornet, and it's probably about 100 feet longer on the flight deck. Different class of ships altogether. It did not serve in World War II, and we did.
This is Essex class, right?
Yes, it is. This is one of 24 Essex class ships that they built.
And it was the 12th carrier they built?
Yes. And 14 of that 24 served in World War II. The other ones were built after all the way up to 1950, and that the Oriskany was the last one of the Essex class to be built.
Not to hog a bunch of questions, but this also was in the Cold War as well?
It was, yes. Yeah, we were not in the Korean War, but we were in the Cold War pretty much. It was an attack aircraft carrier from 1959 to 1970. I'm sorry, to 1970 it was an anti-submarine warfare carrier.
Okay.
Different role altogether. I was explaining to this man about the original construction of this. Well, first off, Hornet CV-8 was the one that was sunk that participated in the Doolittle raid. It's a different class of ship altogether. This is a Yorktown class. Ours is the Essex class, and this was the first iteration of it. As you can see, it was a straight deck, what they call an axial carrier. And it was converted into this angle deck carrier in 1956. And the reason for the angle deck, it was a real substantial safety feature, where the configuration on this, it had as many as 12 cross-deck pendants, where if you were approaching and landing, you had to land. You couldn't bolter and go around like this one affords you to do.
Gotcha.
This one, when you can go around, try again, and it only has 4 cross-deck pendants to it. So this was converted to this with a massive modernization that took place in 1956. And again, the configuration of this, in opposed to the new ones that we have nowadays, is like night and day. This one is actually what you're standing on is a wooden deck, a wooden flight deck.
Wow.
And he has 105 fighters and bombers on it during World War II. If it elected to have a steel deck on it, like the British built their carriers on, it would have had only 80 to 85. So they really wanted to have a massive punch on this carrier, and that's what they did with the wooden deck. The vagaries of it was exposed during the kamikaze era of World War II. The last 11 months of World War II was really a horrendous period of time, where most of the casualties of World War II were in the last year in 1945, even though it ended pretty much in August, right? Yeah. But this ship was attacked 59 times by kamikazes and prevailed without getting hit by them. Other Essex classes did get hit by them, the Franklin being one example. And the damage was really substantial, hundreds of lives lost. They didn't sink though. The Essex class was considered a very lucky class of ships. Flight deck, you might have as many as 200 to 300 men out here that are coordinating all the launching operations up here. And each one of these guys represent a certain function. Just to point out a couple is that the red guys are the ordnance men, the orties. These are the guys that load the bombs and missiles and rockets onto the planes. The guy over there on the far left, that's in the purple jersey, the grapes, are responsible for refueling. And the other guys up here, the white is an officer for quality control and safety. The brown one is a real important job called a plane captain. Plane captains are not necessarily a ranked person, usually an enlisted guy that knows everything about an aircraft and a pilot. And he expects to give the aircraft to the pilot, and the plane captain expects to get it back in one piece. He knows everything about the history, the maintenance of it. He goes and crawls up into the outlet of the jet engine to make sure everything is kosher, and there after a mission, he cleans the windscreen on it. He adjusts the seat the way the pilot likes it. He knows everything about that plane. So real responsible job. In fact, a lot of times you'll see on the fuselage at the bottom of jet aircraft, there's a name and a town over there. That usually is the plane captain. This is the end of the ship where you would land the aircraft. And you can see over there on the fence, there's a sign that says 2, 3, and 4. And that's the location of the cross-deck pendants. Those are the wires that would stop you when you land on the plane. And this, believe it or not, is an example of a tail hook. This is, I think, from an A4 Skyhawk. You can see how robust and massive this is. There's 4 of them over there, and you're instructed to gather wires number 2 and 3. You can see the position of it. Here's the angle deck. We're pretty much standing right here, or we're standing over here by the island. And you can see that these 4 wires that are positioned over there is what you're supposed to intercept on the way down. This is a very remarkable skill for these guys. When you're trying to do this, let's say it's at nighttime, the sea is heavy, pitching and rolling, and you've got to land your aircraft on here after maybe a couple hours of combat time. And you have to do it according to the rules on number 2 or 3 and right on the center line. And there's a guy over there in that area where you see that brown panel with the 2 windows open. That's the landing signal officer's station. He's telling the pilot, he's telling him how to come down. If he's too high, too low, he's talking him down. That guy's got to hit that center line and wire number 2 or 3 to get a grade from the landing signal officer that the best one he can get is an okay. I'm going to take you up to the 09 level in an area called Pri-Fly. Okay. And if you follow me, this is a photography bin. It's a station where every landing takeoff is recorded on film. Where you're standing right now was an area that was called Vulture's Row. And the reason for that is that the pilots, if they weren't flying, would come up here and kind of look at what was going on the flight deck. The center line over there, the landing signal officers there. You would kind of learn and critique your fellow pilots when they were coming in here, razz them if they missed it. If they were the bolter king, they would get razzed about that all the time. That plane down there right in the middle of the circle is a T28 Trojan, which is a training type of plane. That's why the different colors on it. It's kind of like student driver. If you're an aspiring naval aviator, that's the first thing they take you up in, to see if you have the mettle, the wherewithal, if you can stand all the, the loop turns and the S turns and all sorts of other acrobatics that you might even have a chance to control in the early stages. And that's what your first plane is. So that's where we're going to go up there next to the glassed-in area that's called primary flight control, or Pri-Fly, primary flight control. And the way this works is that the guy who's in charge of this is the air boss. See his name on the pedestal over there. Real senior officer, usually is an ex-pilot or a current pilot that knows how to fly all the airplanes, all the variations of that, has aspirations to be a captain of a ship like this and eventually an admiral. Real demanding, responsible job. He's responsible for all 300 men on the flight deck, all the pilots, everything that's 5 miles out and 10,000 feet up.
There's no No joking around in here.
No, usually the guy that's any pilot in the U.S. Navy was either a college graduate or a graduate of the Naval Academy. There was a few exceptions. They called them Mustangs. Like Chuck Yeager was a Mustang. Never went to college, but it was a very accomplished pilot, obviously.
Yeah.
But other things that came on here is you had an understudy that was called a mini boss, who was next in line for this guy who was taking some on-the-job training. And they also had a guy here who was controlling this panel. And this was for the 4 wires over there, 1 spare, and 1 for the crash barrier. And what they had to do was when the pilot was approaching the ship, they would report how much fuel they had, and if they had any ordnance, and tell them to dump it before they landed. They would know what type of plane it was. They would know the weight. The guy who was over here would punch this information into all 4 of these for a safe landing over there. That would alert everybody down below to adjust the equipment for the plane that was coming in at the weight it was coming in at. If it was too tight, all the wires would pull out the tail hook and the guy would go into the drink. If it was too loose, it would be too flaccid, for lack of a better term, the guy would go forward and go over the elevator over here.
There's a lot more going on to landing that plane than just actually him hitting the wire.
That's an understatement, yes. Yeah, you got to think about whether you're going to eject out of your plane. You got to think about the consequences of doing that, because that's not a real good mark on your record when you damage government property. So, the demands of it, of being a pilot and, going through this. But on the other hand is these guys welcome the challenge. We always put them on this board over here these guys are all associated with the ship and have at one time been pilots in the U.S. Navy or in the Air Force. And they have their call sign over there. And this is called a bingo board. And there's always a guy who's standing behind this. This swivels out like this, who writes backwards on this. He's trained to do that, a yeoman type clerk guy. And so you would put all this information here, and the air boss would know if the deck was fouled because of a crash or some other reason, he would have to bingo them to an alternate field. That meant that if it was in Vietnam, maybe they would land at Da Nang if they were off on Yankee Station. Or if they were somewhere else, they can land on another aircraft carrier. There was always 2 of these together. So the bingo board had all that information.
Did this ship have a brig?
Yes, it did. I can
really?
show you that down below. Yes. Actually, there was at one time even Japanese prisoners that were taken aboard the ship. And
It's an actual ship.
yes, it was.
Interesting.
Is the brig guarded by Marines here as well?
Yes, it is. And everybody hated the Marines. We had 54 of them on board the ship as the Marine detachment. And these guys were really buttoned down. They're real different from the run-of-the-mill sailors, and they just hated it. It was like oil and water. But they were the guys that were the correction officers for the brig. They were in charge of that, and they gave you real distasteful. If you were assigned to be in the brig for anywhere from 3 days to 21 days, you really were worked to death doing things like take this toothbrush and scrub that wall floor junction there for the next 8 hours and make it gleam, to scraping the fire rooms had slag and things in a 150-degree environment when you're scraping the stuff off of off the fire brick there, and cleaning the bathrooms, of course. The Marines always had the cleanest head on board the ship. During the Vietnam era is that there were riots aboard ships, race riots. The Kitty Hawk had an infamous riot, a race riot that took it out of commission for 3 days before it all settled down. And they were on Yankee Station at the height of the Vietnam War. And, they had to lock down certain areas of the ship. Nobody got killed, but a couple people really did get, injured. But it was a race riot.
I didn't even know that.
Yeah, if you look that up, that's the reason why they call one of the reasons why they call the Kitty Hawk, which was also, an Essex class aircraft, the shitty kitty, because of some of the things that, went on there. The fire stall was the forest stall that had a real big fire, killed 110 guys. And yeah, it's not a real fun place. And this was all during the 60s when this happened. People on the flight deck, if it goes up to 30, that were ready to do flight operations. And so they would start unchocking and unchaining the planes that are all stationed on the flight deck. Yes, and this gives them kind of an idea of how close they are to deploying aircraft. One of my colleagues down below tell you how fast they built this ship in 1943?
I I read about it, I forgot.
15 months. They put this thing together. It's either 13 or 15, depending on who you talk to. But yeah, it was put together with thousands of people in Norfolk News, Virginia. And about a third of the people that assembled the ship were Rosita Riveter, women. That the entire country was mobilized in the 1942 for the war effort. Over here, that this was called aerology. Aerology as in weather. Weather was really important. So you had guys that were, well, they affectionately called them weather pukes or weather guessers that were trained in aerology. Knew how to read maps, how to deploy balloons to get barometric pressure, to calculate the relative humidity with these certain types of devices that they would spin. And it would tell them, how much moisture was in the air. Different things for detecting wind currents and such. And they would map all this stuff out very specifically, and they would plan their flight operations based on what the weather conditions were. You can see the cloud chart over there that would be very telling. So the weather guessers that were in here had a very important job. Of course, it was supplanted by a lot of the technology from satellites and whatnot. This was even during World War II where they had that. Charts were in here for every part of the world, and they would be able to plot out, where the wind currents and things were, maybe where the emerging storms were going to be. Well, here is where they would determine the position of the ship, and the evolution of this is pretty remarkable. This is a dead reckoning tracer, vintage 1930s technology, where they would dial in the longitude and latitude on this.
There was a light on it there.
Yes, and the light would illuminate a compass rose that would look like that. And they would know, because this ties in with the speed of the ship and the direction, a good approximation, a dead reckoning, you might say.
This moved as the ship moved?
It did. All these gears and dials over here would transfer that. I can turn that on for you again. But they would put a chart on this table that would be representing a section of the world, and they would track by using that compass and protractor type thing about where they were. Accuracy on this, if you were some of the best quartermasters in the Navy, could get you within 5 miles of where you actually were. Considering that the Pacific Ocean is 9,000 by 11,000 miles, that's pretty damn good. Again, the influence of the currents and the wind would kind of distort that reading a little bit, but still, during the Apollo 11 landings, they had the best quartermasters in the Navy working on board the ship, and they used that as to determine, yes, right in this very spot. And you talk about the evolution of technology. Here's a primary example of it. This is called a fathometer, which has a data logger in there, and it measures the amount of water beneath the keel of the ship. So you can anchor, safely. And this might be the equivalent of a $200 fish finder at Walmart that you can get.
Measuring the depth.
Yes, as a function of time, of course. And again, this thing had an anchor that was could deploy for 1,100 feet.
Do you know what the displacement of this ship is?
30 feet. For the second Apollo landing, they did have something that might be the equivalent of our GPS on our phones. And it was the size of a desk, and it had a little box on it. It was about this size. Had a box on the top of it that read, at that time there were satellites going over the poles. And it read out a certain type of readout that these guys translated into the dead reckoning tracer over there that was really pretty accurate. Some say that the accuracy on GPS is within 15 feet of the ones that we have on our phone. But military GPS is down to something like 18 inches. There's 2 iterations of it. Of course, you probably heard that term Loran was also a way of navigating a ship. And Loran was something that the Australians invented in the mid-1940s. It was used and turned off only until, I think, 2003. That box over there represents Loran, where you would turn it on. It would emit a signal to one of 58 different signaling posts all over the world. And by triangulating when that signal came back, you can get to within 100 feet of accuracy on it. However, everybody said that Loran was very temperamental, influenced by sunspots, real bad storms, electrical disturbances, wasn't as reliable as this. and it wasn't as reliable as, of course, as GPS. So yes, this is where they would steer the ship. So you would have a guy that would be here at the helm, a helmsman, and the infamous engine order telegraph that you see in all the movies about how this thing with the levers moving back and forth will signal down below in the engine room about a speed change they want to make. And again, this guy over here is given orders about where to go from the captain and the executive or the officer that's over there accompanying the captain to give him directions as to whether to change course by a couple degrees. And another example of redundancy and backup, you have two gyro compasses, and you even have a regular, just a regular compass there if these two fail. And you'll notice too that left and right instead of starboard and port. And the reason for that is that if you have to assign somebody that's not familiar with the terms over here, they can tell them, you know.
They're in the Navy.
Yeah, they're in the Navy, but only certain guys, you know, the helmsmen are real familiar with that. And somebody that's John Q. Public from down below that, yeah, so they know what left and right is.
Yeah, this here?
Well, that's the voice tube. And
This was for the captain?
yes.
I see.
But he also, when you came into the ship by the ticket counter, there's something called the captain's import cabin. That literally is an apartment that he also has access to, not when they're at sea. He has to be up here. But when they're in port, he has the luxury of a full-blown apartment with a double bed and a scuttle, a bathroom, his own private kitchen, a meeting room up there.
Yeah. Go there to actually rest. This is
Yeah,
where we work.
that to this day, the captain always has an accompanying bodyguard. And that's what,
Safety or
Yeah.
security?
well, you know, they had that riot on the Kitty Hawk. And it goes back to even before that, the age of sail. The King of England appointed the Royal Marines in the 1700s to go on board sailing ships because there were all the officers and whatnot were being captured and impressed into other navies or other countries. And so that tradition kind of carried over from those times of the age of sail to the Royal Marines, to our U.S. Marines that were swapped with the British Royal Navy. And they had great technology and whatnot, like the angled deck over there, the Fresnel optical landing system that they invented and gave to us. You know, the steam catapults was a Scottish engineer. You know, they were really good scientists and whatnot. Radar is another real big example, is that they pioneered radar, but we made it where it could be ubiquitous on anything. You know, our technology and our industrial might miniaturized a lot of that, and they even embedded it into shells in World War II, where there was radio transmitters and things that would beam out something that, if it sensed something in the sky that was metallic, it would explode. And those proximity fuses was maybe one of the most significant inventions of World War II.
That was a big deal.
Yeah, it was a big deal.
That was
Come on this way. Like this here. You see these wing nuts on this thing? This part of the bridge was open to the atmosphere. And this was installed after World War II. And it's, you know, perforated here, and it's intended to dampen the noise from the jet blast that was out there. And they decided to put this in here because with the advent of the jet age, it was just too damn noisy and they just couldn't have this open. This is called an inclinometer. And this is just a bubble gauge that would be maybe similar, you know, the bubble gauge that you have for hanging a photo or a picture in your house. This thing would be just indicating how true the ship is. If it was pitched too far to the left or right, it would be not safe to run flight operations. But sometimes during a real bad storm, this thing would go on 30 degrees on either side, even though it's huge. It weighs 41,000 tons. But it was like just a little cork in the sea when it's pitching around. But this sound-powered technology is, you know, this just like this, ultra-low technology, but ultra-high reliability.
Something that's not fail on you when you're about to die.
engineering. What the hell's my drink?
Of course, you have the ubiquitous butt cans everywhere.
Smoke a lot.
Yeah, there's another one over here, another one over there. Yeah, look, this is kind of interesting. This is a reinforced bulkhead that was designed if they were under attack or if there was reasons for the captain and the guys that were over here to get behind this barrier. they can go behind this special treatment steel barrier here and then repel any, bullet strikes and things like that. And we hear that nowadays they have the same type of configuration in our modern day warships, but they're 16 inches thick. Because, one shot, one hit munitions, in opposed to just hit them in hope like they had during World War II, is that they had so many guns around the perimeter of the flight deck on this ship during World War II. They had 12 of those 5-inch 38 calibers. I'm not sure if anybody pointed out. You might have, with Brian, he probably took you up there. They had 12 of those. They had 39 of these 40 millimeter guns, and 59 20 millimeter guns were, if all these guns were firing during World War II for the sole purpose of knocking down an aerial threat, they can put 20,000 rounds of lead a minute up into the air, just for the sole purpose of trying to knock something down. Last 11 months of the war, and this is, in 1945 for most of it, because the war ended in August of 45, is the kamikaze threat sunk 122 Allied ships, killed 6,000 U.S. sailors, and injured something like 36,000 U.S. sailors in that 11-month period of time. And that's how effective that was, or, how scary it was for these guys. You'll notice another set of leather chairs here. This is a wider chair because the admiral that was aboard, if this was his flagship, this is called the flag bridge. And the admiral would be in that chair and his chief of staff would be over there. Usually if this was designated as a flagship, he would have a staff of about 35 people in addition to these two that would be aboard planning the simple room is historically significant because this is where that guy over there portrayed in that picture frame is Admiral Jacko Clark. That supposedly he was the guy who commanded the biggest armada ever assembled for the invasion of Okinawa. And he was a guy who was a beloved admiral. Everybody that worked for him loved him, and he was a real flamboyant type of guy. Supposedly the first American Indian that graduated from the Annapolis Academy in 1914. It turns out that he was maybe 1/16th Cherokee or something like that, but he exploited that. He used to show up at events after the war in the latter parts with an Indian headdress and everything. And, he was a revered admiral, but very effective, very belligerent, and really very measured in what he wanted to do. Is Jacko Clark is his name.
Let's say that again. Nixon was in here.
Yes, having breakfast. That they prepared 3 different options because they didn't know what he was going to want to eat. And he supposedly had it in this very room over here where, we have all the accoutrements and amenities of preparing any food that you would want down below. But this is a technology that they never were able to duplicate. Even in today's modern day Navy, they still use a Ouija board with all this manual stuff, a guy sitting behind there getting information from the phone talkers that are all around the perimeter of the flight deck and moving this stuff around as needed.
I mean, just for a visual effect or?
Yeah, there was people that came in here and looked for what their responsibility was for whatever. They would put a wing nut on top of one that had to be repaired. A different type of icon on it to say that it had to be refueled or something that had to be addressed. Yes, that's what it is. Combat Information System. There's one light that shows all the overheads here, but this is the lighting that was subdued like this. So you had a whole array of guys that were standing behind on this platform, writing backwards. And how come this doesn't turn on for me here today?
He had it on before. I'm not sure which one it was.
There we go. That's what I wanted to do. And this here was a area that had one guy who was stationed up here that was a lieutenant commander called an evaluator. And he was supposed to be taking in all of this information from various parts of the ship that were for things like underwater for the submarines was taken from here. And the guy would write that there of what they sensed around the ship. This guy over here had another dead reckoning tracer, and he would illustrate skunk means surface contact unknown. things that were in the proximity area, in the proximal area of the ship. That might be a fishing trawler, it might be a container ship, it might be another ship, it might be an enemy ship. And they would calculate by this thing and put that information in there for bearing and range. And there was one thing that was really very important that came out of this area where they had where they were anticipating by time how close it was that they were going to collide with another ship. And they can calculate that by just monitoring all this information here, what's on the surface and below the surface of the ship.
So you had submarine watching.
Submarine watching here. These guys over here would have a quadrant of the airspace around the ship. And they called them scope dopes because they were sitting here relaying information to this guy over here about what was going on in his sector of a four-sector part of the sky. And the chairs are no longer here for this, but they would have as many as 12 guys in here in real subdued quiet with real subdued lighting over here, reporting what was going on when they had when they were doing an airstrike, let's say, off the coast of Vietnam. This was the battle board for the Battle of Okinawa, where the Hornet was the flagship, with that guy that was Jacko Clark up top. And you can see all the other ships that were in the area around it. The BBs were battleships, DDs were destroyers, CAs were cruisers. You had some supply ships out there. And it was really different in the Vietnam era too, because, you know, Vietnam is a very narrow country. And the pilots would have, flight operations that would last only 2 hours before they were coming back and resting up for a couple hours and doing it again, sometimes 4 times a day.
Wow.
Sonobuoys are devices for detecting things that are underwater. And these would be, we had a couple aircraft on board the ship that actually, because our last 11 years was as an anti-submarine warfare plane. And these things were just loaded with a bunch of electronics and just dropped from these planes. And they deployed a certain type of antenna and would report back if there was anything that was metallic in a certain area of interest. It would be reported back to the plane, and these guys would do the analysis of it. And then they would try to hover over maybe a suspected Russian submarine and harass it. And the harassment would take maybe hours, sometimes days, where they would wait for them to surface. And the Russians would sometimes even try to conceal their position and emerge right next to, very close to, within eyesight of an American aircraft carrier, because they knew that captain would lose his job by doing that, because that captain was supposed to know of that happening. They played these cat and mouse games. Occasionally they would even shoot, the US would shoot a torpedo off a German, it would be a dud, a purpose dud, just to give it a big, good thunk on the side of the hull of their ship. And that's what happened during the Cold War era.
It's really psychological warfare.
In a sense, it was. The Bear bombers would buzz over the top of our aircraft carriers, and they would do the same thing. You know, you saw that one thing where the Russian Tom Cruise went over the top and they gave him the finger and all that. Very much in evidence during that period.
Were these retrieved or were they gone?
They were gone. There's tens of thousands of these at the bottom of the ocean, and especially in the Pacific. And I don't know how we did it, but somebody picked up a Russian Sonobuoy, and that's what that red one is. And supposedly it's modeled after what we have over here. And
Bought it off of eBay, probably.
probably, yeah, that's. But over here was just a conference room, another dead reckoning tracer that they would also be tracking stuff down here. And this would be a work area for the guys out there.
Schedule for 1500.
These were important too.
Yeah, and they had all sorts of presets and things for listening to certain things, and they would destroy themselves after being in salt water after a certain period of time. And they're littered on the bottom of the ocean in the numbers of the tens of thousands, I hear. This was a top secret area aboard the ship. Come on in.
Okay.
You see where some of those pneumatic tubes for messages, and all sorts of.
For examples of it.
Yeah, those are the teletype papers that would go in these machines that still are the original equipment from when it was decommissioned in 1970. This was just, radio messages, and these were supposedly encrypted and top secret that were coming from other vessels and other locations in the Pacific. And there were guys that would interpret all this stuff. And baffles because the ship was rocking and rolling. And I wish I can tell you about what these all represented, other than looking at dated electronics that are, capacitors and things. And usually we have one of these open with vacuum tubes in it. All vacuum tube technology is, replaced by microelectronics nowadays. And
Someone's got to build that.
yeah, it's fun to look at where it was made.
It has to be a master solder.
Yeah, we were apparently able to do that. As you get deeper into this, it becomes more apparent that it was more top secret. The two-man rule that only one guy could open this, just like you saw down below in the special weapons area. This is very revealing about these teletypes, and the moving parts and something like that is really pretty remarkable.
So mechanical.
Yeah. Very analog. What do they call that? The bottomless ingenuity of humankind that supposedly is not going to be defeated by AI. Right. Could be maybe about the fall of Vietnam, when you see all those programs about, if you hear, I'm dreaming of a white Christmas, you're supposed to report to your duty station to be evacuated out of Saigon. But over here is the real special room. You want to take a guess at what these are?
Something to drop, mail.
They're weighted bags so that any kind of secret documents that are in here, and you notice the holes in the little grommets over there, that they would put all of that in there and go out that hatch and throw them over the side. And they would sink to the bottom of the ocean and dissolve and never be seen again.
Had to get through that hatch. Really?
But they also have these burn bags over here that are designed to go into the uptakes where, the combustion is supported for the engine room and whatnot. And they burn up and they go up the uptakes.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that sound. Can you read what it is, Sam?
Yeah, it's a message that actually was a very famous message to Admiral Halsey from Admiral Nimitz, that during one particular battle, Halsey broke ranks with the rest of the fleet and went up to intercept a false Japanese fleet that acted as bait to get him up there. And it came down that he didn't follow the orders of the rest of the fleet, and this message came where it says, where the hell are you? The world wonders is what causes Halsey was really pissed about this. I can print another one of those for you. You can keep that.
Yeah.
And this was something that was real pivotal in having one of his court-martials that he didn't follow orders, and that's the reason why you don't see anything really marked with Halsey's. You see the Nimitz Freeway and the USS Nimitz.
Yeah, I've heard of Nimitz before, for sure.
Halsey was he was revered by the public because he had a bulldog type face, and they called him the bulldog in addition to Churchill, of course. The world wonders is what was really insulting to Halsey. Supposedly he was so pissed off that he took his cap down and he threw it on the deck, and his chief executive officer had to cool him down for a couple hours, and he was just really fit to be tied. And the story behind all of that is supposedly they always encrypted before and after messages because the Japanese were listening all the time and vice versa. And supposedly the guy that intercepted this message to present it to Halsey was a junior radio man that did not remove that the world wonders was supposed to be the trailing thing on that wasn't intended to be an insult, but to be something that was intended to confuse the enemy about not being able to understand things. This was really the air traffic control station where, these guys monitored all the activity, would repeat to the, evaluator in the next room about what was going to happen. And again, you had guys that were yeomen behind there writing backwards, as was the tradition.
What do they call them?
I don't think there was any kind of bad name for them other than, they had to have good penmanship and know to have the ability to write backwards. Just like, guys that make announcements over the bosun's mates that make the announcements over the 1MC, the public address system, they have to have the skill of pronouncing real well. And nobody knows what this thing is. We're trying to figure what this thing is. Some sort of compass repeater, but it's real different from all the other ones. And there's a dial on the side over there.
They don't know what it.
Yeah, we don't know. Even the guys that are, real radio nuts don't know what that thing is. So when you find out, let me know.
One of my viewers sees it and knows what it is.
M. Wilcock, come in.
Wow. Again, you just
Yeah, pretty neat stuff.
this. Look at
Like
that.
3 o'clock.
It's like your old.
Yeah, this would be a headset that somebody would have with this thing probably attached to their throat somewhere. Any of the pilots usually had one sidearm, and a lot of times two of them. Is one for signaling, because they would if they got shot down, and the other one to protect themselves. And there's one guy that was a docent who was a F-8 pilot. He retired as chief pilot for United Airlines here like 20 years ago. But this guy actually was in an F-8 that was shot down over North Vietnam. And he was fortunate enough to land in the water. And when he was in the water, he was picked up by 2 North Vietnamese fishermen. And they brought him aboard because they had a bounty on American pilots that, they would get a good chunk of money for doing that. And so they got him aboard, and the first thing they did is they took away his firearm from him. And they forgot to check for the second firearm that he had in back that his girlfriend supposedly gave him as a gift. And he had to take out one of the fishermen. The other guy got spooked and jumped over the side of it, and he got in a raft and was picked up by a helicopter that was off the USS Oriskany and brought aboard the USS Oriskany. He had to eject using his ejection seat to get out of there. And 12 hours later, he was flying again. His name is Willy Sharp. Yeah, I think he wrote a couple books and things, and we have his flight suit down in one of the enclosures down below. And he wasn't on the Hornet, but real revered guy, likes to tell a lot of great stories. And
Dance floor. Valentine's dance tonight. Setting up the bar. Food. It's about 3:30. I spent 2.5 hours out here, so I am heading back. I highly recommend coming to the Hornet, especially taking one of the Docent tours, because they're all very highly knowledgeable and you learn a lot more about the ship than you would ever get from walking around or just the various videos you can see and study.